A couple weeks ago, I went to the Festival of Homiletics in Pittsburgh. Now, homiletics comes from homily, which is like a short sermon or reflection. So it's basically a preaching conference. And it was at two churches, a huge Presbyterian church and a huge Episcopalian church in this great neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And all the things I heard were amazing. There were just some of the best people in the whole country there. And the person who kind of started off was a woman named Reverend Dr. Karen Lewis. And she did a sermon on a story that's been done over and over and over again. But you know you're awesome when you make me go, oh, that's different. And she talked about the parable of the sower. It's a story in the Gospel of Mark, repeated in Matthew in the Christian scriptures. A sower went out to sow, and some of the seed fell among the rocks, and it didn't grow. And then some seed fell in the thin soil, and it got washed away. And some fell in the thorns and got choked and didn't bear fruit. And then some fell in the good soil and produced a lot of grain. And the thing that she got that really grabbed me, because this parable has been misinterpreted forever over the years, and some in hateful and shameful ways. She said, got to remember that when we traditionally interpret this, the sower is said to be, Jesus, and Jesus' teaching is the seed, and if it falls on you and you're good, you'll hear the teaching and be a good follower of Jesus. But that also implies if it falls in the less great soil, then you're less good. Has nothing to do with the teaching or anything else, right? And she says, and reminded us that that's not what it's about at all. What she said is the whole point is the sower went out to sow. I was like, dang, I never got that before. All these years, I totally missed that. Because, and she didn't say this part, but I know, so it just blossomed for me like it's a parable. And a parable is not an analogy. A parable is a short wisdom story that makes its point as a whole taken together. So when you start saying, well, the rocky soil is a person who doesn't accept the teachings of Jesus and therefore is a bad person, it's not an analogy. It's not supposed to do that. It's a parable. A sower went out to sow. Go sow seeds. That's all the story is about. Go plant the seeds. Some of them might grow. Some of them might grow well. Some might not. You can't do anything about that. Your job is to sow the seeds. This is why I go to this conference, because you see brilliant people like Karen Lewis, like, oh yeah, I should have got that years ago. But very important, because so often religion can be used to hurt people, and it's supposed to lift people up. And all the ways that has been turned into an analogy, that you're the rocky soil, you're the thin soil, you're the brambles that choke off the good teaching and the only right way to be. That hurts people. That's been used to make people less than human because they're not good enough soil. And that's not what the story is about at all, and was never intended to be. Basically, a sower went out to sow. And some of it's not going to catch, and some of it is. So sow your seeds. Don't stop telling your story and doing good because some of it might not catch. Some of it might. Your only job is to plant the seeds. You don't have to do anything else. A sower went out to sow. All kinds of things can get in the way of the seed not growing or producing fruit. And just about all of the time, those things are not in our control. You can be the world's most perfect gardener or farmer, and a hailstorm that you can't control can take out your entire crop, no matter how perfectly you raised your crops. It doesn't make you a bad farmer or someone who can't farm or garden. Some stuff's going to be beyond your control. What you can do is plant the seeds. And if you want to take another step further, you can tend them as best you can. But step one is just sow the seeds. Because a sower went out to sow is the whole point of the story. So I thought flower communion was a good time to remind us all of that lesson I learned from Reverend Dr. Karen Lewis. That sowing seeds is important. I'm a minister today because someone sowed a seed they didn't know they were sowing. When I was in elementary school, my two best friends were Derek Goldberg, one of the handful of Jewish kids in our class, and Jackie John Barber Jr., whose dad, John Barber, was Reverend John Barber, the minister of the United Church of Christ Congregational Church in the center of Leominster, Massachusetts. And this was the mid-'70s, and I'm trying my best to figure out if it was before my parents got divorced, so it was before 75. So it was probably 73 or 74, because I'm old enough to remember a lot more of the story. But a lot of homeless people had started appearing in our town. And some people, like Reverend Barber, tried to wake some people up to like, hey, we got to do something. We got to at least find some shelter or food for these people. And nobody was doing anything. So Reverend Barber went out and got a bunch of plywood and some 2x4s, and he literally built a shack on the front lawn of his church. And now his church is in the center of town. You can't go through the center of town without passing it. And he painted it this god-awful, like, aquamarine fluorescent something, so you couldn't miss it. And he got a sleeping bag, and he started sleeping in there and living in there. He was there less than a week. The shack eventually became a tree fort for us in their backyard. But as I grew up, I remember hearing lots from the Catholic priests I grew up with about that you should do good things for people and you should take care of the poor and you should feed the hungry. But none of them slept in a sleeping bag out in the cold in November in New England to get people's attention to say, do something with me. And I think to this day still that as I got older and kept remembering that story, that's what stuck with me. I remember a lot about Reverend John Barber. I don't remember hardly any of the names of those Catholic priests. Because they didn't do something that was important to me. They didn't put their belief, their value, their ethic actually into action. So I think this former Catholic ended up a Unitarian Universalist because of a Congregationalist minister who actually knew what Jesus was talking about. Now, Reverend Barber was a minister. I'm sure he sowed lots of seeds. And I'm sure some of them didn't grow at all. But I know one that did. Me. I know for a fact we have teachers in the congregation, not just because Terrence shared some candles today. Teachers plant seeds all the time. You never know what harvest you're going to get from that. All of us, in anything we do, every single day, the way the world encounters you, you always have a choice. You can be sowing seeds, or you can be spraying insecticides and herbicides and poisons, and we know people who do that. Just sow the seeds. This week, as I was getting ready for this service, and I'm thinking about Reverend Barber, I got an email from somebody who thanked me for the column I wrote this month in the newsletter. I was like, oh, I did it too. Just sow the seeds. Because it's a chain. You sow the seeds, and some's going to grow. And some that grow might be you or you or you who know you, or you. And then you're going to sow more seeds, and it just keeps going on and on and on. Norbert Chopek planted the seeds of a flower ceremony over 100 years ago now, resisting Nazis In a death camp, he gathers twigs and straw and blesses them, and they share them. Now, I don't know how anybody believes even in the power of sowing seeds at that point. Never mind going through with that little bit of a ritual. Because something sowed a seed in him that started a fire of goodness that couldn't be put out or quenched in any way. Because in the face of death, he was still sowing seeds. I bet he thought he was just a minister doing his job, even to the end. But that seed grows. When I was growing up, my dad loved Arthur Ashe, the tennis player. And he would always say this because Arthur Ashe said it. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Sow seeds. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, do all the good you can by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Sow seeds. The seed of goodness and justice and love and inclusion and kindness, sow them by the handful. You ever see the pictures of those sower people and like they're just going like this? They're not putting in little rows 6 inches apart and 7 inches apart from the next other. They're just throwing them out by the handful. Throw them out into the world with all the abandon you can possibly muster. You never know when and where and how something's going to grow. That's beautiful. And there are people in the world we know who make it their business to poison the earth, hoard the seeds for themselves, make gardening illegal, and then gaslight the sowers as doing something bad. They're wrong. Sow the seeds. There are people in the world, like the guy holding the sign at the Pride Parade in Middletown last week, telling everybody they're going to hell. What a bad gardener that guy was. So you sow seeds. So we did. We had a booth. We marched. We had flags. We passed them out along. We sowed seeds. Representation matters. Why? Because sowing seeds matter. As many seeds as you can get out there, it counts. There are people like the bozo who drove by the place on Friday, I heard, yelling abomination at us. What a bad gardener. Forget them. Go sow the seeds. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to be particularly skilled at anything. You don't have to be the best, the most accomplished, the most talented, the most eloquent. All you got to do is sow seeds. It makes a difference what type of person you are, whether you're a person who sows seeds or sprays poison and kills stuff. A sower or a destroyer. A planter or a defoliator. The thing that ends up holding the world together and letting us all go on is not law, it's not democracy, it's not even justice. It's just plain decency in sowing the seeds of kindness and compassion and inclusion and love. And taking a little effort on behalf of the great many people who are left out and put down and discarded and told they're not good enough for whatever reason. You sow the seed and do different. You sow the seed that brings everybody in. We've learned the hard way that nothing stops a democratically elected official from turning into a tyrant and a dictator. When it gets right down to it, who we are matters. Because in any situation we're in, there's no guarantee somebody is going to do the right thing, be kind, act out of love. So you do it. You sow the seed. Be a sower. And every time you do, every time you sow the seed, you're encouraging someone else to do it in ways you may not even know and never even find out. Your part in things may be big, it may be small, it may vary in intensity and commitment and energy, but sow the seeds anyway. Trust that enough of them are going to find some good soil and get enough water and get enough sunlight that they're going to grow and be beautiful and produce crops or flowers or whatever they're going to do. and that's going to be harvested and picked up, and the more seeds will come out of that, and someone else is going to sow them, and it goes on and on and on. Don't ever be fooled or tricked into believing that it doesn't matter, because it does. Sow the seeds. Just sow the seeds. That's the entire point of the story anyway. Thanks a lot for watching this video. It would help me out a great deal if you liked the video to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others, maybe ring that notification bell so you can be informed when we put out other videos like this. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.